So welcome to our session today, which is about being an internal coach. And I'm really pleased to welcome a dear friend and colleague, Claire Allen, to this session. And I'll introduce Claire in a short while. But to start with, I just wanted to explain some housekeeping that I find helps in terms of watching these sessions. So the first thing is to shut down any other applications because you may find that it slows down the transmission speed. And then the second point really is useful always to have a pen and paper handy. So, hopefully this is a learning session. There will be some reflections, some actions that you may personally want to take away for your internal coaching practice. And in terms of timing, we'll be speaking today for around about 40 minutes, and it'll be a dialogue between myself and Claire. So let me introduce Claire. So Claire is a colleague who co-delivers our diploma in transformational coaching. So for those of you that are coming through our training course, you'll be getting to know Claire very well and meeting her at each of the sessions. Claire has extensive experience as a coach in the past 17 years. I hope you won't mind me saying that, Claire. But she's both practiced and led an internal coaching practice at a professional services firm. So that's a bit about Claire's experience, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to hold this dialogue with Claire, so we could explore what it's like to be an internal coach and perhaps raise some awareness around some of the specific challenges that internal coaches face as well. So that's the intention for the session today. So firstly, Claire, thank you for making this time. Let's just go straight into our conversation, really. And I think the first question I would have for you, based on your experience, and the reason for this question is a lot of people who train with us as internal coaches may be then starting to think, or how can they make the coaching work internally in their organization. So just from your experience, what are some of the key enablers in terms of making internal coaching work?
I think that's a really good question to start with as well, Damien, because I think quite often as coaches we can be incredibly passionate about coaching and sort of go through a bit of a lust phase with coaching, where coaching is the thing that is going to solve every organisational, personal, social problem sort of known to man. Mm-hmm. I think when you look at coaching in an organisational context, the successful internal coaching programs I've observed and been part of, and so I'm drawing on my own experience, but also from friends and colleagues I know who work in the internal coaching field in other organisations. I think the thing that we would all agree is critical is you need to be really clear what the business need is that the internal coaching function is trying to address. If there isn't a clear need, it is very likely that coaching will be seen as soft and fluffy and nice to have. And the minute there's a slight downturn or there's a cost-cutting exercise, it would be the first thing that went. So for me, exploring what the business needs are for an organisation, they tend to come from two places. You have a classic cost reduction need for internal coaching. So that would be, we want to spend less on our external coaches, is a very obvious one, or we have a deficit, there's a particular development need that we want to address in the organisation so that it can be more successful, but it is from a deficit place. And then you have the growth agendas, whereby an organisation is thinking, actually, we want to invest in our high potential individuals, and we recognise that coaching can really play a part in that. We want to invest in our senior individuals because they become a lot more lonely in those positions, and they have less people that they can have very open and honest conversations with often. So it's really understanding what's driving the business to think that coaching might be a good idea, or if you're trying to sell it, for want of a better word, into an organisation that you're working within, what are the drivers you think the organisation would respond to? I think those can change over time. So in my experience, the drivers have changed over time, but always being able to connect coaching with something that relates to business performance and a business need I think is one of the key learnings I've definitely taken away.
Mm.
And I think if I then had to say a couple of other things that I suppose have really resonated with me is, I think also it's useful to have high-level sponsorship of coaching. So actually having senior individuals in coaching relationships, they don't necessarily have to be with the internal coaching faculty, but actually having successful individuals openly talking about the value they get from coaching. There's nothing more that legitimises coaching as a business imperative intervention than someone very senior openly saying, well, I work with my coach, and not seeing that as something that's remedial. I think the other thing I definitely learned is this sounds very corporate speak, but being really conscious about what the brand is of coaching. What are the principles you're going to offer coaching around? So really clear who's being offered coaching, why they're being offered coaching, where coaching isn't going to be the answer. There's nothing more credible than actually saying, actually, that isn't a coaching intervention. That's something a performance manager should be doing, or something that we would upskill people in a different way by doing. So not seeing coaching as this panacea for everything. But also being really clear around the things that you hold dear about coaching. So in an internal coaching function, probably more importantly than if you're an external coach coming in, confidentiality is utterly critical. If you let that go to any extent, the whole premise on which the safe space for coaching conversations take place in has disappeared. And that's the sort of thing that would kill off an internal coaching function, because that's so pivotal to it. So being really clear what confidentiality means to the coachee, what it means to the organisation, where you might share data back with the organisation. So a lot of internal functions will gather themes and back on a very theme base to sort of significant stakeholders in the organisation.
And Claire, what do you mean, just so people are clear in terms of if they're new to coaching, what do you mean by that in terms of sharing themes?
Well, a good example would be if you had coaching attached to, say, a particular transition point in people's careers. So it was actively being offered as people went through a certain transition. There would be a lot of wealthy data in those conversations that would be of value to the organisation, but would also be completely confidential to the individual. If you get together a wide enough group of coaches who are working with a wide enough group of individuals, also if you've only got 3 in a population, that's not anonymised. If you've got 20 people going through that transition having coaching, you can have a no-names conversation within the coaching faculty, my experience around what are we noticing when we're working with people who are going through this transition? What are some of the typical challenges we're finding people are coming up against? How might that then inform what learning and development has been put in place before they go through the transition to help them? Or how might that inform other support we put around them? It's on a very high level thematic basis, but actually that is useful data. I feel very comfortable you can gather that and completely maintain the confidentiality of the individuals. Good question though, Damien.
No, thank you. And I'm conscious I interrupted you, but I suppose I just wanted to reflect back. So, some of the challenges that I hear from people that are trying to set up internal coaching, they've done the training and then they open it up in terms of, this idea that it's inclusive, so anyone can apply for coaching. But then potentially people don't apply because there's not that communication around what you said in terms of the purpose and how coaching is going to be used. And also sometimes there's that sense of, well, we don't want to open it up and communicate about internal coaching because then we're going to open a floodgates and we've only got a certain number of people to manage that. But what I'm hearing is just that sort of clarity around not just the business objective, but a purpose enables you to sort of focus the coaching activity in the organisation and therefore make it effective. Is that fair?
I think that's really fair. And I recognise that challenge around we want to open it up to everybody, but there's a slight fear then around, well, what will happen? We have lots of conversations that can sometimes feel quite negative, as in, where do we need to say no to coaching, even though we know that actually it might be quite a useful intervention for somebody. And also, I think there's an education part to setting up an internal coaching function. So how do you make people in the business, particularly say, you might be looking to refer people into coaching, how do you educate line managers or people who might be, again, wanting to suggest coaching for certain individuals, to educate them on the place that coaching has. And also that lends itself into quite an interesting sort of side challenge you have as a coach within an organisation, in that sometimes the work you might be doing is with the line manager. So a line manager might come to you and say, actually, I think this individual really needs coaching, and you might actually say, I think that probably sits in your role to work with them on the job. So how can I help you as the manager, as opposed to sort of abdicating their responsibility unconsciously onto a coach. So that can sometimes be an interesting dynamic, I think, you get particularly as an internal coach.
Yeah, just again, I'm just reflecting back the importance of that sort of education piece, and also, you mentioned earlier about the sponsorship as well, and if you've got senior leaders that are being transparent about their experiences and the value that coaching has brought, there's that sense of sort of, like you say, making this okay rather than this is a remedial process in terms of, you're underperforming, so I give you coaching. Actually, this is about helping us be even better than we were.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and she sort of mentions, some of the challenges that you may face as an internal coach. So, there are, I really believe, I was an internal coach before I went, became an external coach, but so there are specific challenges that are different. But what are some of the challenges that you've sort of realized that internal coaches face?
I think the one that is a very obvious challenge that I think to us, but it's quite a nuanced challenge, is the fact that you are within the organisation. And I think that brings massive benefits, but it also does bring challenges along with it. So the benefit side is you do understand the system. Yeah. Potentially you do, because actually in large organisations there's lots of mini systems going on that you probably don't really understand a lot about all of them. But you have an overarching sense of what's going on in the organisation, and you might have a sense of, what some of the typical challenges people might bring to coaching are. So in a way that sort of gives you that sense of, we're familiar with this. The challenge is that then it can lend you to maybe not asking some of the more naive questions, because you might make assumptions a bit more readily. And so I think as an internal coach, you really have to check that you aren't making assumptions when you're working with individuals, and you are testing for what's the world from their point of view as opposed to your own. And I think the other way the system challenge comes up, the fact you're in the organisation, is if the organisation's going through a particular change programme or particularly tough time, then as a member of that organisation, you will be feeling that also. And I know in my experience, when organisations I've been with have been going through difficult times, that has impacted me as somebody in the organisation. So, and then typically the people you're coaching are coming to you with their challenges with being in an organisation in a tough time. So again, it becomes even more, you have to sort of draw on your own resilience more, because you are part of that system. And that's where things like supervision come into their own. When for internal coaches, I think it's really significant. Being in the system is a very obvious challenge, but there's lots of different aspects to it. And is that something you experienced, Damien, as well?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I just wanted to pick up again on your point around supervision. So just in terms of your experiences, I suppose how do you work that? Is that group, bringing the faculty of coaches together? Is it one-to-one? What do you find is most supportive for you?
Personally, I find a combination. And I think organisations often do use a combination, depending on how much coaching individuals are doing. So someone like myself would be coaching a lot in an organisation. Yeah. So I find one-to-one supervision is really good, because you get that very individual attention. You can really dig deep. You feel incredibly safe in that space. And so for me, I would go without one-to-one supervision. And very specifically, I would choose either outside of the organisation for that. Organisations will have people trained as supervisors who sit within the organisation, which is a brilliant idea as well. I value the fact I have a very external perspective to my supervision, and even to the point it's out. I physically go somewhere else for my supervisions, come out of the system, go and into a different building. That's very, and that really works for me. Also, I know personally, I also get involved in group supervision, coaches in the organisation, and I find that it's different, but it's just as powerful. So slightly less individual attention, but actually you get great learning from understanding the challenges that other people are going through, some of the dilemmas other people are bringing. Just as much learning from someone else's challenge as you often do from your own, because you'll be relating to it, you'll be seeing things from a different angle. So I think group supervision really adds value. One thing that often we overlook that you can draw upon in an organisational context, maybe slightly more easily if you've got a number of internal coaches, is what we call peer supervision. So first of all, it's less formal, it's not with a qualified supervisor, but you're actually, you know, I would go out of a session, and if I thought there's something that just wasn't quite sitting well with me in that session, I might talk to one of my colleagues, again, not divulging any of the confidences around the conversation or even the individual's name. What's going on for me in that session, I'm wondering, and they would ask a couple of questions that would help me with my thinking. I mean, one of my colleagues is hilarious. She sort of, we'll be getting the train, and we're going down the escalator, and I'm going, it's nothing. You know, I thought I was having a normal conversation. I'm just chatting away about, this sort of happened. And I was a bit uneasy, and she'll ask me a really powerful question as we're on the escalator. I'm like, oh, behind me, that really made me think. So I think supervision is something you can access as an internal coach, possibly more easier than an external.
Yeah, no, great. And I just, I suppose what's really resonating with me is just the importance of, with that sort of external perspective, being able to step out of the system, make sense of, I suppose, not losing sight of what it's like to be in the system, and some of the dynamics that you're facing, but then also being able to unpick your experience so you're not being contaminated by perhaps your relationship with a certain department or whatever when you're actually, holding the space for your clients. And you mentioned confidentiality, Claire, as being one of those sort of critical components of, really enabling people to feel safe by having an internal coach. And I was, again, just curious about any sort of challenges you've come across around that have tested that, or have perhaps meant that you've had to hold that boundary really, really strongly.
I think the challenge arises on two levels. Firstly, it's based on trust. So you can say to a coach, this is completely confidential, and I would say about how we might gather themes, but content's confidential. They have to trust you, and some people will build that trust with you. But making an assumption that just because you said it means the other person believes it, I think would be a little bit naive. And I know for a fact I've seen conversations get deeper and deeper as the individual does realise that this conversation's not going further. And then I had a fascinating one that almost flipped that round the other way, where an individual was like, oh yeah, I understand it's confidential, and they were really incredibly open. And it was by about the third session they said to me, oh, it really is confidential, isn't it? Because none of this has gone back to my line manager. and it actually made me chuckle, because I thought, I'm getting the sense that you probably wanted it to go back to in some way. So there was something else. It was quite an interesting conversation I could then have with them. And so I think you have to establish confidentiality with your coachees, and I think that don't make the assumption by saying that's accepted. I think you potentially have challenges from the organisation where they do want to understand what's going on in the coaching conversations, and that's where, particularly when you're setting up an internal coaching service, you just have to hold the line so clearly. And I do it with a smile. And so I'm at the point with a lot of the senior stakeholders to say, oh, we know you can't tell us anything, Claire. We're just letting you know our views on things. And but they say we know it's frustrating, and I'm sure you know lots of things, but actually to the point now where there is zero expectation that you would share anything out of a coaching conversation.
Yeah.
I think it is stick to that boundary so clearly,
Mm.
and really be strong with people looking to maybe slightly bleed, because they're not doing it for a Machiavellian reason. They're just maybe not so clear about, well, what do you really mean by confidential? What is in that? You know, they want to know what's in the conversation to help the individual, but actually you hold really true, and you get so much more respect from the business by doing that, because that is a cornerstone of your professionalism.
Yeah, sure, sure. And you know, there's obviously you know, I'd say that for internal coaches as well, using sort of three-way goal setting, you know, so there are some sort of public goals rather than, and of course we can have private goals with the client, but just that sense sometimes of that transparency enables us to be able to sort of manage that. And at the same time, you know, as coaches, how do we step out of the need to update the manager? You know, it's always, we're encouraging the coachee to take responsibility for that with their manager, aren't we? So they feel involved in the process, but we're still, I suppose, maintaining that relationship. Yeah.
And that's a really good point around the updating piece. That's another place where you can see either the coachee would rather you have the conversation with the manager, or the manager says, oh, I'd like to speak to you, and the coachee says, oh, that's fine, I'll give you permission to do that. But actually, if you end up in that dynamic, power is the wrong word, sorry, responsibility, choice has gone away from the coachee. You've taken some responsibility off them. And our role is to say, well, what would stop you having that conversation? Conversation needs to end up taking place.
And I suppose with that in mind, you know, for people that may be training with us, or perhaps people that are listening and are establishing themselves as an internal coach, maybe as part of their role or full-time role, what sort of advice have you got for them, Claire, that you know, just based on, you know, your experience to date?
I think, excuse me, both based on my experience and also seeing other coaches coming through in internal roles, I think it's thinking about you as a coach. My main bit of advice would be take it slowly, and you know, not feel the need to rush into either making a really big offer overtly out there in the organisation. Maybe do some experiments to start with, being clear why you're doing them, but you know, do some experiments to see where actually this might add the most value. But also take it slowly in terms of you coaching individuals, particularly if you're training as a coach. So allow yourself time to prepare properly for the sessions. Allow yourself time to debrief after the session, sort of, you know, reflect and debrief after them. And the other piece of advice I would give is not feel pressured into hurrying up the contracting phase and the initial inquiry phase. So it often, depending what sort of organisation you're working within, if you're in an organisation that is a very pacey organisation, it's very easy to collude with the paciness and someone to sort of say, right, this is what I want to work on in coaching, and you know, this is what, you know, you have a very transactional conversation about that, and this is what I want the outcome to be, and right, let's get down to it. And there's this whole sense of pace, and it can be quite seductive to collude with that. Whereas in actual fact, the real value is sort of slowing it down, really getting under the skin of, well, why is that important? So what really would success look like? Why coaching? Why now? What the forms of development has that individual explored? How have they worked on it in the past? And I think that can sometimes feel as that you can almost sense sometimes the frustration from the person sitting in front of you. It's like, come on. But I've learned to my peril, if you skip over that phase, you really don't set yourself up for success in that coaching relationship, and you don't really do the other person any service either. So that's why I think my main bit of advice would be to take it slowly, both in terms of how you introduce it to the organisation and in terms of how you personally bed into that coaching role and hold some of the core principles true. Makes sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And just sort of, I suppose, again, a question that we often come across when we're training coaches is, you know, who should I choose to work with, you know, in terms of when I'm practicing, and obviously there's added complexity when you're an internal coach, because you may have another professional relationship with them. So yeah, so what thoughts do you have, again, from your experience, perhaps working with other internal coaches that may be training and identifying people to work with? What sort of advice would you give them around that, Claire?
Um, I think where I've seen it work well is where potentially you involve, depending how the coaching is going to be offered. Is it so much you're choosing the coaches, or where does the organisation want some of this coaching to be directed towards? And it can be quite helpful to elicit other people. So it might be from a learning and development function where they say, oh, actually, we can probably identify a number of people where in an experimental way we could offer coaching to them on the back of a programme, or because they're in this point in their career. Similarly, HR colleagues could be really useful to identify people where coaching would have a business benefit, even if at the beginning you're trying out to see where that business benefit might be. So I appreciate sometimes it's a bit chicken and egg. Mm-hmm. I think what I might avoid is asking friends for favours, and I have definitely done that really early on in my coaching career. I maybe wasn't taking it as seriously as I potentially should have done, and I just literally rounded up 3 or 4 friends and said, oh, go on, let me practice my coaching on you, and did it. And it wasn't the same, it wasn't the same. It was really difficult to do the contracting, so I probably skipped over some of it. There was a slight difference in the dynamic of the relationship. It just wasn't the right thing to do. So actually trying to identify people where the business would see some value in them being coached, or just somebody else would see value in them being coached, I think helps set up your coaching relationships better. And it's a lot easier for you when you're training, because you don't have the element in there of they're doing me a favour, which I think can be a little bit unhelpful.
Definitely. And yeah, I mean, again, I just really like the piece you're saying there around, starting at the beginning in terms of identifying where there's the need in the organisation, because you're already starting to have conversations with people about the value of coaching. And I know some new coaches feel, oh, well, I'm new, I'm not going to be adding any value, when actually, as they start to get through the training and the program, they realise the amount of value they are adding. So, so really to try and let that go, and like you saying, trying to step out of any sort of more challenging dynamics with friends, because obviously there's that trust piece there as well, in terms of how that impacts the relationship. So again, that just sparks a thought for me, Claire, about boundaries around relationships. And obviously as an internal coach, you may have a professional relationship outside of coaching, or you may have some contact with the person outside of coaching. So yeah, I suppose from your experience, again, what would you like to share around that? I mean, how have you managed boundaries? If you're, I don't know, perhaps you're in a meeting and there's a team member that you're working with or something. What are your thoughts around that?
I think that is something you have to be very cognizant of as an internal coach, and it comes into your contracting. Mm-hmm. You're entering into a coaching relationship, that is something that you would talk about. So if we're outside of this coaching relationship, how do we want to be with each other? What would be, if we bump into each other in the lunch queue, what conversations do we want to have? And I would always be very clear that when we're in a coaching relationship outside of that, I wouldn't expect us to be having a conversation around some of these things that we're talking about, and I won't be asking you around that. And that's not because I'm being rude or I'm not interested. It's actually, it doesn't feel it's the right space for us to hold that conversation. If you want to say to me, oh, Claire, I did X, and I'm really excited about that, that's delightful, I'd love to hear it, but I would be very explicit. I wouldn't want them to think I'm uninterested if I'm not making an inquiry outside. I think the thing that I learned probably a number of years ago, this was where you are coaching somebody that you do then also meet with them on, say, a project basis, or you're potentially in a working group with them about something else, or on a committee with them. And at times, or they're one of your stakeholders, I suppose is another way to put it. And I went through a unsuccessful phase, where you needed to meet them, I don't know, to talk about maybe coaching in their business, and also were coaching them. And either you or your PAs would have those two meetings together, and that just does not work. It's really hard to get clear boundaries there, because are we talking about coaching and do we have to then shift ourselves and then talk about you? So actually, it's being really clear when you're meeting someone, we're in a coaching relationship here, or we're in a different relationship here. Around verbalising those dynamics, and it doesn't have to be a deep, heavy conversation all the time. It's just noticing. I'm noticing we're in two different relationships. I experience other differently in them. If you're working on a project together as a coach, you might see me being really directive because I've got views about how that project goes, because I'm not being a coach in that situation. That doesn't mean when we go into our coaching session, I'm going to start telling you exactly what I want you to do. So I think it's around the conversation, but being very aware you will have different relationships with individuals potentially as an internal coach.
Yeah. And I suppose it resonates for me in terms of some experiences I had where, we had spoken about confidentiality, and similar to what you say, I'd sort of shared my views. And then I'd be in a meeting with one of their peers and they would be saying to me, "Oh, I understand you're coaching X. I wonder how that's going for you," and I'd be sort of a bit like, we've spoken about confidentiality, so there was a point around how do I respond, in terms of, I suppose, being on the front foot in future. So I sort of learned that actually as part of that sort of confidentiality discussion, I wanted to hear around, their views around how were they going to put this in their diary, what were they going to say to their peers about whether they were having coaching or not, just so I had some understanding. Because otherwise I'm trying to have a poker face and not react to that question I was getting from their colleague.
Yeah, and it is difficult because someone might say, "Oh, is so and so in a coaching relationship," and you just kind of think, "I'm not really sure. I need to be telling you that information," and you can sort of get tied up in knots. And I think however much you do strong contracting at the beginning, and you will always come across questions that sort of throw you a bit as an internal coach. And I develop a bit of a stock phrase as to say I tend to look ignorant about quite a lot of things. I'm vaguely aware of them, or I'm not really sure about that at the moment, or I'm quite comfortable looking quite ignorant about things, and to get out of that ambiguity.
And I suppose linked to that, there's a thought I've just had. So based on some recent experiences where I'm working with training internal coaches, and we may be talking about endings, and the coaches are sort of holding a mindset that actually I work in the organisation, so our relationship's going to continue. And again, just curious about your experiences around the importance of endings in terms of bringing that coaching program to an end.
Yeah, and I think you do have to be clear, and also I think it would be naive of us to assume that by being clear that the individual still doesn't pick up the phone to you later on and say, "Can I have another conversation?" And so it's kind of learning how to manage those. So in my experience, I would have a coffee with somebody. They said, "Oh, actually," and then if they wanted to go back into what I would call contracted coaching, they would have to fit criteria. They would need to do whatever process there is sitting around entering into another coaching relationship, and it wouldn't necessarily be with me. So for me, I would keep a limited but friendly relationship, because it is about a relationship with that individual. But I might do one coffee afterwards if they wanted to have a chat, or phone up, saying mulling something over. To be fair, some of that comes from a lot of the people I coach are very senior individuals, so many people to have a conversation with. But I'm very clear when in a coaching conversation, or actually we're just having a bit of a chat, and the idea being, would they want to go back into a coaching conversation? I do think it can be quite tricky, and if you notice somebody is constantly just sort of saying, "Can I just have a word? Can I just have a word?" I then had to have a conversation about, well, what they're not getting from the business that means that they do need to keep having these conversations, or what needs to be different from them so they can find support elsewhere, which can feel quite a tough conversation, because most people go into coaching because we're helpful individuals. The individual feel more resourceful because you're highlighting what they might need to do. I don't really have a clear-cut answer on that, Damon, apart from yes, it is really important to understand things, and yes, the ambiguities around it.
No, sure, thank you. And I suppose just to reflect back, I mean, I get a real sense of, the importance of not just the clarity around the internal coaching provision, but also the professionalism in terms of how people experience that. And that's what I'm really noticing as we're talking. And I think that's, so incredibly important for the profession, in terms of internal coaches becoming, I don't want to use the word equal but just in terms of people's perception of the value of the coaches that work, in the organization, whether they're internal or external, there's that sense of the experience, the professionalism is the same. Yeah. So I could go on talking about this for ages because I'm really passionate about this subject myself as well. But
So could I.
yeah. But bringing this sort of session to a close, just one final question I have for you, and it could be a bit of a curveball in a way, but just thinking about people that may be really starting to become interested in training as a coach, or wanting to enter a career as a professional coach, whether that's internal in an organization or as an external coach. What advice would you give them in terms of what you think is really important for them to consider as they're coming into our profession?
I think that's a really good question. I'm buying myself some time here.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting because I do think people go into coaching for lots and lots of different reasons. And I suppose it's knowing the reason why you were going into coaching would be quite important to me. So I went into coaching because I kind of fell into coaching, and I'd love to have this. I had a road to Damascus moment, and coaching was my calling. And I didn't. I fell into coaching because I wanted to move out of a role that I was in previously. I was having a lot of conversations with individuals around their careers, and that prompted me to set up initially a career coaching provision because there was a need for career coaching in the organisation, and that set me off on my journey, which has morphed, massively over the last 17 years. So I sort of feel a bit hypocritical saying, be really clear the reason I slightly fell into it. But I do think 17 years ago, it's a lot less clear as a profession, and they've gone into it for different reasons. But I think, no, are you doing it for yourself because you really, really love helping people and you really want to sort of add that in there and you personally would get a lot of enjoyment out of it? I think that takes you so far, but I think in an organisational context, that can then become a bit evangelical. You need to fit with an organisational aims. I think, is it because you feel really passionately about enabling that organisation to succeed and you can see people at certain points struggling and actually really want to use the coaching capability to help them? So I'm probably not being my most articulate with this answer, but I think it comes round to having the self-awareness to know what it is, why you're going into coaching, what really attracts you to coaching, and what do you hope personally to get from training as a coach? Because I think that will help you then orientate towards the types of clients you want to take on, the types of further development you take on after some of the initial training. So how would you answer that question, Damien?
I think similar actually in terms of why. So I mean, if I just answer from our perspective, Claire, in terms of our proposition around coach training, it's fundamentally so much about your development as an individual as it is about how you then develop others. So that sort of sense of if you just want to, if it's about, I don't know, it's like some people may enter coaching because they think it's a way of making money. Well, that's going to create a very different space in terms of actually this is something that's very at the core of who I am. I enjoy being of service to people. I fundamentally, perhaps I've had an experience of being coached myself and it helped me through a transition as a leader, and therefore that's why I want to support others. There's something about that clarity. And that links really, doesn't it? Because in terms of our program, that's one of the core questions that a participant will be exploring as they undertake that sort of learning process as well. So thank you so much for your time.
So,
I really think there's some real nuggets around being an internal coach, and also thinking about how I can make internal coaching work in my organization. And that was really my intention of asking you for your time today. So thank you so much, Claire.
you're
Uh,
welcome.
in terms of, for those that are listening, I'm just going to draw your attention down to the bottom of the screen where you can see our web address. And if you go on our website, look under the resources page, you will find our curriculum of webinars that are going to be happening throughout this year. And there's some interesting topics that will be coming up, and I really hope that you can join us for some of our live sessions as well, so we can make it more interactive. So thank you for listening. I hope you've taken some learning away, some reflection about yourself as a coach in your practice, and look forward to you joining us again in the future.